Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 6 of the podcast. A surprise. Happy Friday. We're really excited to be here today. Sorry about the delay of last week, but we're here today with some more Witcher goodness. Today, we are going to be covering the Edge of the World from The Last Wish. I'm super excited to be here, of course, like I said. But before we get into the chapter breakdown, I'd love to introduce my co-hosts, Michal and Aziz. What's going on, Michal?
Hey, guys. How's it going?
I see that you didn't find a name like Kyle Evandrel today.
No, I was really just like, I thought about Michelangelo, and then I was like, oh, then I'll have to look up how to spell Phil Evandrel, and I do not care to do that right now, so.
That would have been funny if we could put that, like, Spider-Man meme where, like, we're both pointing at each other. We both have the Michelangelo, Kyle Evandrel. Well, welcome, Michal. Nice to see you. And we have Aziz from History of Westeros.
Hey guys, happy to be here. This story is so funny and interesting, surprisingly unique in so many ways. And of course, we get to meet Dandelion, Jaskier. So cool. So yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
So for those of you who know us, know that we have 2 versions of the podcast. But for those of you that don't know, we have a live version that we have on Fridays that you're witnessing right now. And we also have a downloadable version of the podcast that you can check out on Anchor, our sponsor's homepage. We have how many episodes now, Aziz? You broke up the last part into a few different episodes, right? The spoiler cast?
That's right. Only one of them is out so far, but it will be 3 total when it's done. So we officially have 5 with 2 more to come, plus this. So when this is done, we'll have 8.
So we're approaching 10 episodes almost. We're pretty excited about that. We have an awesome playlist, of course, which you can check out. I actually have the link to Spotify, iTunes, and all the awesome other different listening platforms you can find right in the description of the video. I have actually the links to the live streams as well. So if you all wanted to check out our other episodes, you can do that really, really easy to go check that out. Of course, we want to thank everybody that has hit that support button, tossing some coins to our podcasters. Of course, that is a great way to help the podcast grow. We really, really appreciate that. And if you want to do that, so be it. But if you're enjoying our podcast, you can like the video and comment in the comment section and subscribe. Now, Michal, shall we start off with a quote?
Let's do it. And I need a title for my ballad. A nice title. Maybe The Edge of the World. Banal, snorted the poet. So Sapkowski is shading his own title for the story.
I wonder about like what the exact translations are. I'm sure it's the same thing since it's the same phrase, but I wonder about that sometimes because we've heard that the translations are sometimes imprecise or not controversial is way too strong a word, but criticized maybe.
Yeah.
But sometimes that often makes it more fun.
Ludmilla, by the way, big shout out to her. She's been extremely helpful for us. So.
Yes, big ups, Ludmilla. Okay, synopsis. Geralt the Witcher and Dandelion the Bard are enjoying a drink at an inn located within the town of Upper Posada in the Kingdom of Aedirn. They're new friends, having met at Goulet not too far to the west across the river Diffne? Yeah. It's a rural area to be sure. If one goes any farther east, there are substantial terrains unfit for human habitation, deserts, mountains, etc. We don't even have maps for what's over there. All this explains why the story and this area are called Edge of the World. Geralt, of course, inquires if there are any monsters troubling Upper Posada. It's both a good sign and bad that the alderman takes a bit of time to remember or perhaps grasp what a Witcher even is. A bad sign in that Geralt's services are not in particular demand, but a good sign that the area is monster-free. Isn't that interesting? We have an area so untroubled by monsters that the idea of a Witcher itself is fading. Not only that, the monsters named in the area, for the most part, don't even exist, according to Geralt. And others named he wouldn't even consider monster at all. But some would. The alderman does point east to the mountains.
Only look ye yonder. See those mountains. There's elves live there. That there's their kingdom. Their palaces here ye are all of pure gold. Oh, aye, sir. Elves, I tell ye, 'tis awful. He who yonder goes never returns.
He then goes on to blame the elves for creating the non-existent monsters that plague them in admittedly awful ways like tangled horses' manes or honest drunken peasants in a stupor prevented from finding their way home. Clearly here in this story, Geralt is facing monsters far more cruel and powerful than ever before. The stakes are clearly raised. Dandelion wonders why people invent monsters when there are so many real monsters out there. Geralt explains to Dandelion that men invent monsters to cover for their own failures, weaknesses, and crimes. Existing monsters can't account for every little thing. For example, a basilisk would indeed prevent a man in a drunken stupor from getting home by killing them. No one will believe you if you pin tangled horses' manes on a striga. One of the reasons why Geralt and Dandelion are working out as friends starts to become clear. They both love discussing philosophy and swapping stories. They don't necessarily agree, but they seem to have a similar process for reasoning through problems. When there's danger about, one has little time for such frivolities, but riding along the idyllic and bountiful paths in what is called the Valley of Flowers, or Dol Blethana in Elder speech, one can't help but relax a bit. A man named Netley catches up to them on the road, and after telling them in his infectious local drawl that he has proper work for them, he recognizes the silly tales told in Upper Posada as just that. But in his town of Lower Posada, there's a true monster. Netley offers them a ride in his cart, and they enjoy the scenery even more and continue their conversation.
You know about agriculture?
We poets have to know about everything, said Dandelion haughtily. Otherwise we compromise our work. One has to learn, my dear fellow, learn. The fate of the world depends on agriculture, so it's good to know about it. Agriculture feeds, clothes, protects from the cold, provides entertainment, and supports art.
And this, too, is why, Netley explains, his forefathers took this place from the elves, because the Valley of Flowers is a valley of plenty, a place where bountiful harvests are common, a place where
everything seeds mightily here, and grows as to make the heart sing.
But in the days of the elves, the bounty of this place took a different form, as elves are not known to farm nor domesticate animals. Netley takes them to Dune, the village elder of Lower Posada, who feeds them well and then proceeds to describe the problem facing them. Devil. Curiously, they say the creature is even helpful with regard to the farms, an odd way to begin a description of a problem. It does come, however. He's extremely annoying and perhaps one for going too far with the intoxicants, living as he does in a field of hemp. Geralt notes that the hemp field also indicates the devil is clever, as large amounts of hemp dampen magic, but the devil causes no serious harm, they say, and for once the people of a place don't want the creature killed, just driven off. Geralt sets out to confront it, but without violence if necessary, he leaves his sword behind. Dandelion is perplexed by all of this.
There's no such thing as devils, yelled the poet, shaking the cat from sleep once and for all. No such thing! To the devil with it! Devils don't exist! True, Geralt smiled. But Dandelion, I could never resist the temptation of having a look at something that doesn't exist.
Off they go to rummage through the hemp fields where, after some time and more chatting, this time a bit one-sided, they meet who they're looking for. It doesn't go well. Dandelion describes it succinctly.
That's not what I expected. A horned freak with a goatee like a shaggy billy goat, and he chased you away like some upstart. And I got it in the head. Look at that bump.
Geralt had not been given the full story. They had already tried to drive this devil off by themselves using some strange tactics, and now it's wary of further tricks. The villagers admit to this when confronted and reveal that their revered ancestors. I swear that was not on purpose.
Blooper episode.
The villagers admit to this when confronted and reveal that their revered ancestors, in the times when this land was untamed, referred to an ancient bookie.
In this here great book, continued Dunn, which be in our family clan for time immemorial, be ways to deal with every monster, spell, and wonder in the world that has been or will be.
An old woman, seemingly deaf, brings the book, a fascinating old tome. Something seems odd about the person presenting the book to Geralt. At first, she seemed a silent teenager, but only the silent part turns out true. When she's closer, he realizes he was wrong, a rarity for someone with his keen eyesight. She is much older, but he cannot determine how much, and notably, the villagers of this town have a certain look to them, one she does not come close to sharing.
Yeah, because of the incestors.
By the way, we have so many funny moments to talk about, so be ready.
We do, yeah. Furthermore, it's odd that no one, no matter how loud, can make themselves heard to the old woman. But the younger one tells her all that is said by everyone else by whispering in her ear. Having noticed such out in the field, they found the devil. Geralt inquires about the offerings of grain. He's puzzled, since the creature is clearly an herbivore. Why give it grain or any foodstuffs at all? The girl, whose name is Lilla, they say, is a wise one, though she never speaks. Geralt has heard of this before and understands why they keep her secret. They also tell him that she wanted to meet him before agreeing to let him drive off the sylvan devil. In other words, Lilla has the final say in things, without speaking. The problem is bigger than they've first let on. The sylvan is taking large amounts of crops, far more than one person or sylvan could need. Despite the fertility of the place, they're expected to provide a certain amount to the rest of the kingdom, so the bounty is not actually in excess. It's spoken for. Geralt returns to the field to negotiate with the sylvan, but after it challenges him to some unfair contests, things devolve into wrestling and fisticuffs. Distracted by the scrum, he's unable to prevent being struck by elves from behind and taken prisoner, along with Dandelion. When they wake up, the missing pieces of the puzzle fall into place. The sylvan, named Torque, has been stealing food for the elves. But not only that, he's trying to learn how to farm and use the crops for basics like making clothing so that he can teach the elves the same. The elves are starving. The Valley of Plenty sustain them, but the mountains and forests nearby do not, especially in winter. They're suffering greatly and have no small measure of not unreasonable bitterness. Worse, they see Geralt and Dandelion as a threat to this vital operation. Letting them go is too risky. They could be found out. But as Lilla would not allow the killing of Torque, neither will Torque allow the killing of Geralt and Dandelion, despite their differences. A devil with principles, the Robin Hood of Sylvans. An elf named Teruviel speaks her bitterness, hitting, insulting, and threatening them, and destroying Dandelion's loot. Despite being bound, Geralt manages to break Teruviel's nose, and her bitterness breaks with it. As she pulls her dagger, she begins to sob. As another elf prepares to strike, but is stopped by a command instead.
The horse which had just reached the glade was as white as snow, its mane long, soft, and silky as a woman's hair. The hair of the rider sitting in the sumptuous saddle was identical in colour, pulled back at the forehead by a bandana studded with sapphires.
Filavandrel, leader of these elves living in exile. Like many of his people, he once lived where the villagers now live. He explains their predicament, how humans have permanently changed the world, and how dealing with them, living with them, would itself be a deal with the devil. Filavandrel declares that indeed the humans must die. A firing squad lines up, though Teruviel does not pick up her bow. She stands beside her fellows. Torque cannot stop them directly, but he stands in front of the prisoners, insisting that this must not be. They insist, but his response is simple.
The sylvan shook his ears, bleated even louder, stared, and bent his elbow in an abusive gesture popular among dwarves.
Geralt is resigned to it and tells the sylvan to step aside and let them get it over with. But Torque just repeats the gesture at the Witcher. It's not personal either way. He doesn't like Geralt. It's just that this devil is against killing. Though brave and principled, the elves show no sign of backing down. But then...
Lilla entered the glade. She was no longer a skinny peasant girl in a sackcloth dress. Through the grasses covering the glade floated a queen, radiant, golden-haired, fiery-eyed, ravishing. The queen of the fields, decorated with garlands of flowers, ears of corn, bunches of herbs. At her left-hand side, a young stag pattered on stiff legs. At her right, rustled an enormous hedgehog.
The elves kneel. Geralt can tell that Lilla and Filavandrel are speaking without talking. Suddenly the elves leave, and Filavandrel begs her aloud to come with them, calling her Eternal One. She shakes her head and points east, a gesture clear and final. Teruviel gives her loot to replace the one she broke, and Dandelion declares it worth the whole endeavor. Geralt himself receives the old book as a reward, and Torque hits the road with them. Later that night, they sit around a fire as the day and story wind down. Dandelion attempts to compose the events into a ballad, And Geralt consults the book about Lilla herself.
Forsooth, the wise do say that Lithia loveth but one land, and that which groweth on it and liveth alike with no difference, be it the smallest of common apple trees or the most wretched of insects, and all nations are no more to her than that thinnest of trees, because forsooth they too will be gone, and new different tribes will follow. But Lithia eternal is, was, and ever shall be, until the end of time.
So great synopsis there, Aziz, and let's give it up for Michal, who is very versatile with all of her different voices. I, of course, said about 6 words, so don't clap for me. But let's get into our reactions, because we've had a few private conversations about this one. Obviously, the podcast has been pushed back a week, so we've had some extra time to chat about it. This one is a really interesting short story. It has lots of powerful themes. It has really cool lore. We're introduced to more of the Elven history, which is really cool. We get another monster again. Last time we covered the question of price for the past 2 episodes, so we didn't really have monsters in those episodes. So we have a really intelligent monster, which is something that is unique. And hell yeah, this is a really, really, really funny short story. We had discussed privately that this one didn't hit hard as home in the way that it was significant later on, because we don't see Torque later on. We do see Philovandrel and the elves and the anti-elven attitudes and some of the xenophobia and some of that kind of stuff later. But what were your impressions of the chapter, Michal? Because this is a really interesting one as far as like comparing it to the other short stories.
Yeah, I think the first time I read it, I wasn't super into it. And then I did a reread a while back, and I actually straight up skipped the story, because I was like, this is the story that has to go if I'm racing to finish the book. And so when I read it this time, I wasn't really expecting much, but I actually really quite enjoyed it. It's very funny. Dandelion is, well, Dandelion. Every time you're like, that's it, I hate you, I can't deal with you anymore. He does something like charming and endearing and whatever, or says something hilarious. And yeah, I thought the themes of narrative that people talk about in the story and the stories they tell themselves, and like kind of the context of the book, and the really tragic story of the elves played out really nicely. There are definitely still parts I'm like, not 100% what you're getting at, Sapkowski, but it's overall, I actually quite enjoyed reading the story.
This was a very Sapkowski-esque chapter. Like, everything kind of unfolds at the end, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of been the pattern that we've been discussing with these short stories. Aziz, what is your reaction of this chapter? We have been back and forth sending a lot of memes back to each other, like Torque has the biggest balls.
Yeah, I'm a real fan of this one for sure. The humor really gets me. I laugh out loud, really loud, reading this story and quoting it, and I love trying to figure out what the heck they're saying, like how to pronounce like diavol. Like, how do you guys say that word?
Dioval. Have you listened to the audiobook? It's really funny.
Yeah, they have good pronunciations there.
Yeah, well, the first time I read it, I listened to the audiobook, and I was like, why is he saying it like that?
Dioval.
And I was like, oh, okay, that's actually in the text.
And it's funny because you were doing the townsfolk accent, and in the audiobook that's hilarious as well. It's like a very like folksy, like peasant, a very folksy peasant accent.
How do we call them stupid without being insulting?
Yeah, exactly.
Infectious manner of speaking. Yeah, and there's some creepy, interesting lore. I totally agree with you guys about the elves. Like, that is obviously really important for the ongoing story. It's an interesting introduction, and it's a surprising turn. Like, this is, you're kind of moving along. It's kind of a little bit silly, lighthearted. There's a little bit of, you sense something is coming because that book has these monsters in it. You're like, okay, something unusual is going to happen, but it's not really what you would expect necessarily. You wouldn't. When I first read it, I thought there would be some real monster, like behind all this, there was going to be something. But of course, again, it's the monsters are the people. It did come out that way, but it's not the people that are there now. It's these people that are long gone. If anyone, maybe even they weren't monsters, but it's just really fascinating the way that these there's no right answer here. There's no bad guy necessarily. So I think that's a really good twist.
Torque is really interesting too, because he's like this representation of a shadow of all of these different characters we see within the short story. And something that I like to allude to, and that maybe some of you caught while doing your read, is he's kind of like the angel and the devil on your shoulder. He's like trying to like be a balance of both sides. You know, he's really this great mediator between all of these different things that are going on, while being absolutely hilarious and causing trouble for all sorts of people. But we got an absolutely awesome craft section. We got awesome lore. We got some Greek mythology, some Sylvan stuff to talk about, just overall, it was a really different hitting chapter. Like, I agree with Michal in the sense that when I read it again, I was like, oh, it wasn't as like depressing as some of the other some of the other stuff that we've seen so far. It kind of tears at your heartstrings. It's like, oh, this is a fun little adventure. Like they're sitting around a campfire and they're alive and happy, and it just tugs at your heartstrings a little bit. This one, once you reread it, I find.
Yeah. What's that candy that you like have to lick to get to the center of?
Tootsie Roll.
And yeah. So it's kind of like you keep looking through all like the comedy and all the funny stuff, and then you get like this brief little like, oh crap, things are really serious and sad, and then we kind of like go back.
Yeah, you kind of go back. It's like, 'cause it's another world almost. It's like it's the elves' problem almost, like that there's some sort of detachment from it, because the Geralt and Dandelion, they don't live amongst they can sympathize, but they're not going to live amongst the elves. They're going to remain detached from this problem until, it becomes personal. Like, as they say, like, one day we're going to come out of these mountains and come fight you or something like that. And well, we're not going to get into spoilers, but let's just say that that's not entirely an idle threat, is it?
It's there for a reason, I think we can say.
Yeah.
It's funny because we'll talk a little bit about the show adaptation towards the end, but when this is the kind of stuff that makes the Witcher book series great. When you go and read a chapter like this, and things will always be lost in an adaptation, but you go and read this chapter, you're like, oh damn, I wish they had an extra 2 episodes so they can put a little bit more of Torque and Philavandrel and some of the other stuff in. But we're going to talk about it today on the podcast, don't you?
Yeah.
Shall we get into some crafts and themes?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. I love this quote, actually. People, Geralt turned his head, like to invent monsters and monstrosities. Then they seem less monstrous themselves. When they get blind drunk, cheat, steal, beat their wives, starve an old woman, when they kill a trapped fox with an axe, or riddle the last existing unicorn with arrows, they like to think that the bane entering cottages at daybreak is more monstrous than they are. They feel better then. They find it easier to live.
Yeah, it's like they do. What he does is it's like a system of keeping it light. You're riding along the path, or they get more relaxed. The characters do, by going from horseback to riding in a cart. You have time to talk about philosophy. I mean, if you have time to discuss philosophy, your life is going pretty well, right? I mean, you're not fending off monsters or starving to death or anything like that. You've got a little bit of time. So that in itself helps you relax. They're talking about lupins and look at all the corn, like that's not exactly a sense of danger. But then, bam, it gets serious. And I like the way that works.
Yeah, and that quote really kind of presages it, right? Because we come across that quote in the beginning of the story when they are still pretty relaxed, and then Geralt drops this kind of like dark, like FYI, real monsters are humanity.
Yeah, he's still kind of wary, but not fully wary. I mean, he leaves his sword when he goes to check out the silk. He's like, well, if these guys aren't being harmed by it, then I have nothing to worry about. But he's still like, he's still like, where something is going on here.
Yeah. So, oh no, go ahead, Kyle.
No, I was just gonna say it's a really, the pacing is really interesting in this one, because we talked privately and we were like, there is more filler in the short story, but the way Sapkowski navigates it is really interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, I don't like, I think there are stories that are filler, and then I feel like there are stories that are philosophical stuffing of the story, and I think that's what we're doing here. We're not as much like, there are just a lot of ideas in this story that are laid down that are just very important going forward, which, as cool as like the lesser evil or whatever, like it's not all the stories have that depth of kind of seed planting that will become important later on. Like, I wouldn't say you had to read the story, but I think that looking back, it definitely contributes a lot to the general, I don't know, texture of The Witcher.
It's funny that you say seed planting. This short story is a lot about growth and fertility and loss and all of that. So that's it's funny that Torque is kind of a representation of that. This odd character.
Yeah, he's an interesting messenger for the story. It's not at all what one would expect. I mean, he's like, a devil, right? Like, he's not very devilish. I mean, he has some aspects that are associated with devil stories, but personality and like outlook and like level of, I don't know, violence is very different, and I love that subversion of that theme. It's both somewhat typical of Sapkowski, but not typical. So very interesting in that sense. And humor.
And by the way, just a quick shout out to Maura Lee. Thank you for the $10 donation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank
you, Maura.
Maura is always so generous. We really appreciate that.
True that.
So yeah.
Yeah. So should I get into my storytelling rant?
Do it.
Let's do it.
So reading over this story again, it became really evident to me that this is about narrative in a certain way, and about the importance of narratives in people's lives. On the surface, it's kind of like, oh, well, this is the story where we meet Dandelion, and that just happens to be. But I think it's actually really important that we meet him. Because he is the storyteller that is going to eventually carry us through the story, and the idea of meta narratives within The Witcher is going to become really important, and Dandelion plays really heavily into that. So I really like actually that this story doesn't have, at least, the three of us North Americans couldn't really pick up on a specific like fairy tale that this was really playing off of. And I like the idea that it's more the stories that people are telling in their lives that is the story inspiration for this story. Geralt starts off by telling us about all, the quote I read about the people, the stories that people tell themselves, which is really ironic because, like we kind of think of like, all right, so it would make sense for us, to make up stories about monsters, but like people in this world have actual monsters. So why do they still bother making up stories about monsters? And it's, it's that human thing that you need to feel less monstrous. I think that idea of narrative continues with Netley and the villagers because they're super protective of Lilla because they're kind of like, she's basically the witch who's going to be burned if they fail to protect her. And there's a really interesting passage about how the narratives that are advanced by the wise ones are usually in direct conflict with like the immediate best interests of the lords. So the lords are like, burn the witch. And then the people are like, no, we'll kill all our herds or do whatever, seemingly crazy thing that they ordered us to do instead. But they, that narrative usually prevails. Then there's the idea that we have an actual book in this story, which I love, because it's not just like fantasy and also like reality. Like we have a great passage we're going to get into about the Witcher entry in this book. But this book provides the whole village with a narrative that they think keeps them safe. And it gives them meaning. It gives kind of justification for them being here in this valley, which obviously is something that the elves are going to object to pretty strongly. It doesn't even matter that, the old woman can't read. That's irrelevant. The point is the story. The book is like a vessel for their traditions, like a lot of stories are.
It's funny, Michal, because it's kind of like Sapkowski is taking a shot at Christianity in the Bible a little bit.
Yeah, it's very interesting with that. Yeah, we have some stuff to talk about that later, because there is some really, I don't know, there's some very interesting kind of jabs at tradition in this story, and kind of the way people make tradition their own and how that changes from what it was supposed to be, or the original version or whatever, is fascinating.
Yeah. That's why we see it's so interesting, the interpretation of how people see the devil,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of one of the really strong themes in the chapter.
Yeah.
There's a great I love the conceptualization of time here, and how, like you said, Michal, they feel like they've been there forever, yet some of the elves in the mountains were alive when the land was a lot of them were alive when the land was taken from them by these humans' great grandparents or whoever. So to them, it hasn't been that long at all. So since forever would be an insulting phrase to say to them. They're like, since forever, this happened when I was a kid, when I was a full-grown adult, and now I'm just, I don't know how to reckon in elf time, but it's not since forever from their perspective by any means. And I think that's just really interesting. That's the kind of thing that, again, as North Americans, we feel like, we really haven't been here that long compared to how long this continent has been here and how long people have been here. I mean, there were obviously natives here already, and then, Viking explorers and Spanish explorers came substantially long ago. And yeah, so time is funny that way, and our ability to view time is very small. And this concept of the elves having lives that are so much longer, that their take on history and lifespans is so very different and hard to fathom, where they're like, yeah, this is just like, we're going to wait this out. We're going to wait out the lifespans of several human, generations. Like, we'll just wait. Like, wow.
but that's where we get into the theme of assimilation. We've seen that with, the Bible being written over, like new versions of the Bible, and this story being story of Christianity changing over years and years and years. And we see the kind of the elves have been dying out, like they're just trying to survive. And we kind of see that assimilation thing going on within the short story.
Yeah, well, that's really what Geralt and Filavandrel are arguing about, right? They're arguing about which is the narrative of survival. Is the narrative of survival that you become, that you assimilate, that you become like the power, that you reject being dominant over you, but you're forced to accept that, and you live. In the next story, like minor spoiler, we're going to have an assimilated elf character, and he kind of has he's a very interesting contrast to these elves in the mountains here. Or there's survival that way, or do you survive through kind of a path of violence and death, where you make yourselves as separate and as bitter as possible, and like literally an impossible thing to digest, for the dominant culture to digest, and that is obviously extremely destructive to both the elves and the broader human culture. So I mean, I find that conversation really, really fascinating. It's something that will come up a couple of times with multiple, I guess, fantasy species in the books. Yeah, and it's a really interesting idea, because like, which is the more valuable prospect, right? Like, is it more valuable to be alive and and lose your sense of identity, or is it more valuable to like be starving and dying in the mountains, but separate and, making your own, like remaining yourself to the end, really? It's a complicated question.
Aziz, that's what makes Geralt's speech so powerful, right? He's really being honest with Filavandrel. He's like, hey man, I see what's going on. I feel for you, but if you continue to act like this, you guys won't survive.
Yeah, it's really powerful. You're right. He's also just kind of angry because he feels he's about to die, so he's really just going to say everything on his mind, and there's no reason to hold back. Not that Geralt's a big for holding back anyway, but this is maybe the first time we see him like really angry. You know what I mean? I know we see that in other places, but I think maybe this is the first time he sounds bitter, like really.
He loses all diplomacy in this.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because in previous stories, he had kind of been like trying to fix all of these different human problems, but obviously Geralt is similar to Villavandrel in the sense that he's experiencing some of these same problems that he is, right?
Yeah, and turning it around, what I said before about the lifespans of elves, they're blaming these humans, and Geralt's like, look, not a single one of these humans took your land. That was their great grandparents or whatever. And if you want to look at them as a monolith, that's fine. But to see that that's something that we very much disagree on. That these people may not be innocent, but they don't deserve to die for, and then having stuff stolen from them is. Maybe that's fair, but the humans on the other hand, feel entitled to the land because their fathers and mothers did not just the work of taking the land, which is disputable. That's maybe wasn't such a fair thing to do, but the actual driving away the monsters and planting the farms, they did that. The humans did all that. So they feel some entitlement to that. They put work into it. They that's real work. That's real effort. That's important, making it livable and all that. So it is really a tough spot to be in. It's a really interesting conundrum. And what do you do? I mean, how do you resolve this? I really don't know.
Yeah, and Sapkowski doesn't try to answer the question, which is important, I think, because it's just sort of like you do just kind of have to sit with that. And there is this idea that the consequences are sort of inevitable, but they're also the result of choices that people make, in that path. And that's something that we'll see with the elves specifically. I know it's sad, like for a very funny story, a devil character. It's also like, oh God.
Connects with the main overarching theme of the whole series, which is destiny, which is like, and this inaction versus action thing. Like, okay, if you don't act, something's going to happen, but if you do act, at least you're in control of what you're doing somewhat, So it's that kind of narrative that Sapkowski's trying to get us to feel.
I think another little theme here is the importance of places like this. Not just that, it's easy to make fun of and to joke about, which we have done, but it's also like this is vital. This area is extremely vital to the whole nation. They talk about how their food goes out to various places, and it's important. And that's just a completely normal human thing. I mean, any of us who live in a city, the food we eat is not coming from within the city there's exceptions, but most of it is grown outside of the city. And that's an important distinction, the rural urban sort of dichotomy there. And I like that as a presentation because it's something that's true even now. Modern, ancient, you have places where food is grown that are vital, that kind of supports the entire nation. And because of that food, we're all allowed to look at books and read technology and do whatever we want because the food is taken care of. And that's just something that's a good thing to be aware of in human society, where it all comes from.
That's also like a great contrast to the elves, I think, because the elves, I guess, in traditional conception of them, let's get real, Sapkowski just kind of steals from Tolkien, which is fine because he's commenting on that also. But they are very erudite and very all-knowing and stuff like that, and they've gone from that state, in which, the earth, they didn't even have to farm. The earth would just flower forth with food and stuff and support for them. To now they're literally they have no idea even how to plant the most basic of crops for sustainability. And, that arc, I think, from being, the top of the food chain, but not even kind of acknowledging that there's a food chain, to being almost at the bottom. And that experience of rage is really, really powerful.
it shows the social hierarchies of the human race specifically, right? Like the sense of entitlement, and then all of these lost traditions are happening. We see like kind of the erosion of culture in this short story.
Mm-hmm. Well put. Yeah, it's interesting too to have this thought that this food is so vital to the nation, yet it's the edge of the world. It's like, well, this is the outside of the, on the outskirts, but it's arguably one of the most vital things. So that, I just think that's an interesting contrast too. And just a difference to this area too, like Dandelion says, there's wisdom in ancient songs, which is a really great comment and theme, because that's true. Like these ideas are captured by songs, and it's a great way to preserve them, because songs have more longevity. Well, can have more longevity because they're so memorable. They stick in your mind, and are like an earworm, and they can last forever. So what little bits survive can be really important.
Yeah. Well, on that note, really, I mean, I think the kind of like mini arc of Dandelion's lute is really important in this story.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because that's kind of like his, I mean, it's not just his, way of earning money and therefore earning food. It's his way of telling stories. And when Teruviel breaks that, she like denies him the right to tell stories. She tells him to like play at a cow's horn, you savage. That's because Dandelion and humans, in her mind, are totally unworthy of having a narrative. Like they are not allowed to be part of the story. And she's trying to violently put that down. But then, when Lilla kind of shows up and reverses that, she like basically validates their part of the story. And that's when Dandelion gets Teruviel's own lute, and he's able to tell stories with that elven tool. And I really, yeah, exactly. And it says, that they exchange, she gives it to him wordlessly and he accepts it wordlessly, but Dandelion's eyes said a great deal. And of course, that's how we get, honestly, the message of this story, because Dandelion then sets it into song and makes it part of that tradition, that we, if we were people in the Witcher universe, would pass on and learn from, like the book, like all these other things that are, again, not necessarily accurate, but true.
One thing that I will say that the show did good, I kind of want to just jump in here, is we got toss a coin. At the edge of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Toss elf on every shelf. Toss an elf. I can't remember. But then we see the direct correlation of Dandelion, Jaskier, and Geralt being on this adventure, and them and Dandelion being this history teller. It's so great, right?
Yeah, the song, it works like that. As much as they left a lot out of the episode, that core theme was retained, which was that the music is important for memory. It tells stories, and the better the composition, the more likely it is to survive and thrive and go viral. Which, whether you like the song or not, Toss a Coin to Your Witcher went viral. I mean, there's no doubt that song did really well, and it did its job. It's amazing that you can see why it went viral in world, because it went viral in the real world. So it's like, this is authentic. With Lilla using telepathy to Dandelion accepting the lute, and to the looks that pass between Geralt and Teruviel and Filavandrel and all that, and it's just heartrending, the idea that the elves want Lilla to come with them, and she's like, no. And it makes me think of the same sort of stuff we were just talking about with, like, maybe like North America, where the land was the thing they worshipped, and when that's taken away, that's like being denied your gods or something like that. And I can't fathom what that's like, having your gods leave you or something like that, whatever the equivalent term is.
There's the idea of being rejected by
or of feeling like the God's love is gone, like someone who's a devout worshiper of Christ, for example, in the real world, that has this what's the right term for that when they lose their faith? Is that just that you lose your faith, something like that? And that's for someone who has a sincere, deep belief in that, to lose God's love is a humongous. I mean, there's really nothing worse than that, I suppose, or it's about as bad as it gets. So, again, that's where it goes from soft spoken to powerful just in a blink when you start thinking about it. And yeah, it's really powerful, right?
Songs are another version of storytelling, and it's so interesting that Jaskier is a bard because, in historical lore, bards have been known to tell stories, and of course, we see that with Dandelion Jaskier in the books and in the show. And then also, sylvans have been known to love music and wine, so Sapkowski is doing it on the double here. He's really trying to give this as like alternate version of storytelling within the short story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very meta.
It is very meta. Yeah, I'm sure there's metas that we're missing too. There's some that we seem to have keyed in on, but Sapkowski's upbringing would, in a different time would be a little different than ours. He's sure that surely some other stuff. But as we brought up earlier, the whole influence of Christianity in the Bible there's no doubt that's at least in play somewhat, if not a lot.
If we said there was less fairy tales, but more Christian theology and more like Greek mythology in this one, as opposed to it was like more about gods.
Yeah.
Even like the idea of a book that they don't read is very much in line with a lot of traditional Christianity, whereas for a long, long time, peasants weren't even allowed to read the Bible, let alone, and first of all, they couldn't understand it because it was written in Latin, and they didn't speak Latin. They spoke English or French or what have you. And then it was like heresy to translate it. And then eventually it was normal and everyone had a Bible. But it's strange to think about that, right? Because now, especially, in America and a lot of other places, their Bibles are everywhere. There's one in every hotel room. So the idea of it being something that regular people weren't allowed to own or read was kind of wild, but it's completely true and well documented. And, but the idea was they didn't want other people making their own interpretations. They wanted to control the interpretations and the takes, basically. And
no hot takes on the Bible.
So I think that's kind of neat. And the old timey speech and weird names for measurements, like for example, in the Bible, there's the term cubit, and that's people. I don't have a particularly Christian upbringing, but I remember even some of my Christian friends making fun of that term, like, what the hell is a cubit? And in this one, we have the word utricle and there's two weird measurement words. I can't remember the second one. It's like, what? And I'm pretty sure he was having fun with that. It really feels like just using old-timey measurements that sound funny,
Yeah, and even the sentence pattern, like take of 2 parts old or soft cheese, or like things just being in the wrong parts of the sentence to our like modern ears. And then he explicitly quotes the golden rule, I guess reverses the golden rule: don't do unto others as what you would not have them do unto you, which I have to think is just an explicit reference right there.
Yeah,
it's Sapkowskian version that we see in every short story.
Yeah.
So here's the here we actually pulled the 2 quotes from the Old Testament, Leviticus. Here they are.
I guess, Michal, you want to do the first one?
Sure, yeah. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord.
Which is, by the way, I didn't change that. In our notes, Lord is in all caps, which is kind of, I was thinking about that. Like, wait, did the Bible really have Lord in all caps? Did it really just?
Yeah, in Old Testament translations, yes. In Hebrew, because it's acronymed in Hebrew. Yeah.
That's neat. So this kind of blew my mind. I was like, wait, because it's funny to think about the old version of an emoji as a hieroglyphic. It's like, yeah. So the old version of all caps is like something like this. Like, man, this stuff is old. People have been doing these things for thousands of years. Yeah. Okay, here's the other quote.
But treat them just as you treat your own citizens. Love foreigners as you love yourselves, because you were foreigners one time in Egypt. I am the Lord, your God.
So those are both from Leviticus, like I said, Old Testament, and that's obviously on theme. Michal brought up the golden rule, which is perfect. Yeah, that's very much in play here. Geralt tries to talk to Torque, and then when Torque is just not having it, he's like, all right, well, you threw this ball at me. I'm throwing it back at you. So do unto others. Yeah.
That's just like a really funny part where they're just like, okay, so you were trying to get rid of him, and you armed him.
Yeah, it's like, why did you arm him?
It said 2 balls.
Yeah, you gave us a balls a sack full. Dandelion's enraged. It's so good.
Aziz, there's like a lot of strong traditions that are associated with the devil that we're going to talk about here, like deal with the devil, like making your land more fertile, like selling your soul for some form of advancement.
Yeah, that's a really common theme, and some of that's like pop culture Christianity. I don't think that's biblical, right? I'm not the man to ask, but I'm pretty sure that no one's like making deals with the devil in the Bible that I'm aware of. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems seems like a more pop culture-ish thing, like stories, like music stories, like Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil to be really good at guitar and things like that. So and with that, along that line, we have contests with the devil, right? Like the devil gets, again, guitar contest or violin contest or what have you. So I think that's being played with here, where Torque is like, well, let's have a race, but I get to start first. He's just that's the common theme. The devil cheats, and here Torque isn't being sneaky about it. He's just like, no, I'm going to have an advantage, otherwise I won't play. And it's like, wait, hey. So I think that's a big part of that here. Beowulf, elves are associated with the devil in a lot of Christian traditions, and just old traditions that are associated or influenced by Christianity without being directly Christian, like Beowulf. The story of Beowulf says elves were born from Cain killing Abel. So that's obviously Christian influence, but I don't think that Bible verifies that. But still, that you can see this association with Torque, who is a devil, and elves. So I think that's probably where that came from.
Yeah, and you can even, he sort of addresses that where Dandelion's like, well, devils don't exist. I thought we invented them so we could swear about them. Like the devil's scheiss or whatever it is, and he has a whole list.
But, by the way, Cain and Abel, sons of Adam and Eve, Cain was a farmer and Abel was a shepherd. So we kind of see him sprinkling that in with Torque.
That's cool. Yeah, right on. In the from the wiki, I found this. The short story ends with the words "Good night," said the devil, and it's I think Ludmilla helped us with this one. It's a Polish idiom to say where the devil says good night, referring to a place that's in the middle of nowhere. In other words, edge of the world. So that's a great example of something that goes over our heads because it's a Polish idiom. So thanks to Ludmilla for catching that one.
Yeah, that's actually a real shame because the end of the story is kind of like when you read it in English, because you have no, it's like good night to the devil. All right, cool, good night, Torque, whatever, but that is that's an actual meaningful reference apparently in Polish. So
yeah,
that's kind of a shame that things do get lost in translation.
Yeah,
but thankfully we have Polish friends to fill us in on all the stuff we're missing.
We had a few more people last night join our Podcast Surprise Facebook group from over the pond in Europe.
So, awesome.
Yeah, so apparently we must be doing something not terrible if people from Poland are enjoying our podcast.
That is pretty much the best endorsement. Yeah. So speaking of more native peoples, we talked about Native Americans a bit because that's obviously part of our own history here as Americans and Canadians, as us as podcasters. But Sapkowski clearly has some of his thinking is, I'm sure he's taken from a variety of cultures that were pushed aside, but I think he's particularly thinking of the Celtic Britons, the Welsh in particular, because the elder speech is very, very much Welsh sounding. Gwent is a Welsh kingdom, and that's the Witcher card game. Welsh names often had the ap or ab or ep, like the ap, for example. there's a million dudes named Llewellyn in Wales. That was like the most common name. It maybe still is. There's names like Llewellyn ap Griffith, which is he was a famous prince, and Llewellyn ap Sizzle. I'm probably saying that wrong.
Sizzle.
Llewellyn ap Sizzle. Llewellyn the Sizzle. Gwyneth, like the double D sound is pronounced TH in Welsh, so it's that's why I said Griffith. It looks like Griffith, and Gwyneth is not Gwynedd, you know. So Welsh is very difficult to pronounce. So it's a great language to adopt for sounding mystical, because it's also associated with druids and the elves live among nature. So it really fits quite well. The whole thing about elves not domesticating animals or using agriculture, that's very much a druidic influenced thing. And the Celtic Britons were slowly pushed into Western England as the Saxons and then later Danes and other cultures moved in. And the Western England is where they have lots of mountains and hills and deep forests, which is where the Welsh kind of retreated to. And that's what we're seeing here with the elves. So very, very similar in a lot of ways.
I was just the Lost Kingdom just popped in my head. That's a great show to watch. Some of that.
Right? Yeah, you see that.
The history of that. If you guys want to go check that out, I think we're doing a Witcher podcast right now. But if you do want to see some of that, you should go watch The Lost Kingdom.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Shall we get into some character analysis?
Let's do it. Characters, yeah.
I think we got to start with Dandelion Jaskier, right? Or
Sure.
or should we say Buttercup? Is he?
Can you imagine if they went with Buttercup as the translation?
Oh my
I'm
God.
really imagining the translator just going like, oh, what do I do?
It would make Dandelion, everything Dandelion does, so much more egregious and flamboyant. Like, it'd be like, yeah.
Well, even Dandelion, honestly, Dandelion is not like, in at least American English, flowers are feminine, like, names. Like, they just are.
Yeah.
So, like, Dandelion is less feminine than Buttercup, but, like, when I read that, like, I had a really hard time, like, wrapping my mind around, like, a male character named Dandelion. And, like, it kind of, you know, on a personal meta level, it kind of points out, like, how silly all this is, because flowers are, you know, there's nothing feminine about flowers, really, but it's just, yeah, it's very interesting to me, actually, when people pointed out that, like, Jaskier doesn't have that same female connotation in Polish.
You know what's really interesting about dandelions too is that it's used for medicinal purposes, and in a way, I like to think of Dandelion's relationship to Geralt specifically, at like his love for Geralt and their friendship as a sort of medicine. You know, Geralt has a very difficult time opening up, and we see Jaskier, even though he's a shit, really help with Geralt expressing himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His like positivity has a good impact on Geralt. That's a really good way to put it. Like he does have that rejuvenating power. Like he is sort of like medicine for Geralt. He helps him. Like he's his only real friend. I mean, Geralt, obviously, Yennefer is a closer to him than Dandelion, but they spends more time with Dandelion, and that's a much different style relationship. So as far as like his buddy, this is really his only buddy. So, and when you only have one friend, that one friend is really important.
It's funny when you said the thing about dandelions, because I was going to say, oh, what, they're weeds that you can't get rid of.
well, it's funny because they're both sweet and bitter, and
Yeah.
we see Dandelion as both.
And they can really go viral, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, they can spread. They can spread throughout like Dandelion songs.
And they're tough. They can grow anywhere. Yeah, they just turn up where they're not wanted.
Hard to get rid of.
Oh, man.
And that really does speak to him pretty well.
Yeah.
I wonder if that was intentional from Sapkowski.
I don't know. I mean, the thing is, like, I liked Joey Beatty as Jaskier so much in the show, and then I was like kind of startled to see Jaskier or Dandelion in the books, because he definitely is more of like a, I don't want to say mean, but maybe mean. and like definitely more sexist, and like they're not quite the same character. It's definitely it's an interesting contrast, I think, that at some point we'll get into between show Jaskier and Book Dandelion.
I would say though that I have had discussions with people on Reddit and Facebook and in the comment section, and like people are obviously quite critical, like us who love, like, obviously we love the show. We wouldn't be doing this podcast if it weren't the case, because we watch the show and we read the books. I just think a lot of, like, there was people being critical about certain changes within the show, but the Joey Beatty Jaskier thing wasn't really one of them. Like, he plays the lute, he's a musician, his personality, like, he is Dandelion, like he.
Yeah, when I heard he actually plays that lute, I was like, oh, +1 right there. That is big. That's big ups. That's
well, I had such a big crush on him after I watched the show, and then I was like looking him up, and it was like, oh, he played Mark Smeaton in the like the play of Bring Up the Bodies, Wolf Hall, and I was like, I didn't get to see that when it was in New York, and I went to see it, and I didn't see it, and I would have known Joey Beatty before then, but oh well.
it's kind of funny, because I'm going to use Game of Thrones here as a reference. We look at Peter Dinklage as like the perfect Tyrion, right? Like, there couldn't have been a better option for someone to play that character other than Peter Dinklage. And then we look at, Henry Cavill as Geralt, and we can argue that there might have been other options of people to play Geralt, but Joey Beatty is like that perfect option for Dandelion.
Yeah. Just putting it out into the universe. Joey, if you want to come on the podcast.
Live performance.
Yeah. I will even challenge you to
backup.
I will even challenge you to a singing battle in which I will lose.
Whatever works to get him here, yeah.
So
yeah, he is kind of interesting. Like, he doesn't, his character, the way Sapkowski has built his character, he's not he runs from relationships and people, but he doesn't run from danger, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, and Geralt's kind of similar. Geralt also is more likely to run from an uncomfortable, awkward situation, but not if it's a violent situation. He's like, no, I'll fight. I'm not going to run from a fight. He may not want to. He may think it's wrong to fight, but it's not going to be fear that drives him away, or awkwardness. But relationships, oh yeah, that can. But neither of these guys are good with relationships.
It's funny because you talk about Jaskier or Dandelion running away from relationships. We have Geralt doing the same thing. So peas in a pod when it comes to that.
They have so much in common, despite also having somebody like, I love we'll obviously talk about it another time, but the voice of reason portion of this, where he's like, oh, I studied history because the books were, it was easier to conceal alcohol behind the book, and he's like, Geralt's like this. It's like, yeah, it's a perfect example of how they think alike. But also, like, the nature of their work, like, Geralt has to wander around looking for monsters to kill, and Dandelion has to go from place to place too, because people are going to get tired of his songs, and he's got to go to another town and go where the love is, right? Because he wants to be adored, and when he's been in a place for a while, he wears his welcome out, and they've heard his songs, and so moving on is part and parcel of his life and lifestyle, which obviously fits Geralt really well too.
Yeah.
Speaking of our lifestyle, Maura Lee is continuing to enable us to continue the podcast with another $25 donation, tossing a coin to my 3 favorite and fabulous YouTubers. A big thank you to Kyle, Aziz, and Michal for making my Friday talking about the Witcher books. Thank you again, Maura.
Thank you, Maura.
Thank you.
Sorry, Michal, go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah, I mean, I feel like I was just going to say something about Jaskier. Joey Beatty's so great. Oh, no, here's what it is. Somebody in the chat pointed something out, which I think I heard Joey say in an interview also. Joey, we're on first name basis. But he, that in the books, he's kind of like a playboy, and in the show he's just genuinely in love with everyone, and I actually love that, because I think it's totally true, and it kind of, when that feeling is a little bit deeper than, like, he's just a love puppy versus like he just wants to sleep with everyone. It's a little bit more appealing in the show.
But by the way, Macrophage says in the chat, Jask Rawi in Polish means bright and bright. Exactly like Jaskier, Dandelion.
Oh, nice.
So once again, thank you for more translations.
Very good. Are we ready to move on to the next section, or?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we have Torque.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
ahead,
who wrote this note? This is a good note. I didn't write this one. I like this note about the angel, the inversion of the angel and devil on your shoulder. Instead of being one on the other shoulder, he's playing both sides. Not playing both sides, helping both sides, which is a really clever inversion of that trope, or that typical, well, yeah, trope is the right word.
Yeah, Torque is a really interesting character. Like I said, Shadow or Reflection, when I was writing this in the document. Torque is a sylvan, which is referenced in the chapter, which is described as an exceedingly rare humanoid species of intelligent herbivores. Sylvans resemble a human with goat's horns on their head, hairy legs with cloven hooves, and tails with tassels at the end. Because of their horns, they are referred to as diavels, or devils, by superstitious peasants, a nomenclature that Sylvans are not particularly fond of. Sylvans are also called willovers, pucks, and yakshas, which is I don't know. They live in forests like Brokilon, in which they are tolerated by dryads and leprechauns. I never knew that leprechauns had that much power in the continent, but there you have it. And at times they descend to fertile farming areas such as the Valley of the Flowers, which is used referenced earlier in Doth Blathana, because of the abundance of food. They aren't seen as a threat by humans and are often accepted as harmless. They are playful. They are often known to be play as tricksters within mythology and different lore, and they love riddles. So we just definitely see a little bit of that in the chapter as well.
Yeah, I love that part. He's got such a great, funny personality. Everything about Torque is so unexpected.
Yeah.
What?
Well, and you don't expect the depth from him at all. Like, I really like your description of him as he's just like, goat Robin Hood. He's like he's making all these jokes. He's like, he is doing the puckish thing very much so. And then he kind of like turns around and is like a hero. And it's awesome.
He's kind of a jerk, but he is a hero. It's like, well, you can easily forgive this jerkiness when you realize how like heroic he is, and like sticks to his guns, and he has good principles, basically. Like for the important principles, obviously we could criticize him for chasing women around and setting fields on fire with his pipe and things like that. Those are clearly bad deeds, but it's true that if you are the kind of person that stands up for people's lives and are brave, and you can get away with things like that if you are really good in other ways. So.
Well, Aziz, it says that Sylvans value peaceful resolution when caught between the conflict of elves and humans specifically, and they despise bloodshed. So we see that clearly. This is just in the Witcher lore. You can go in the Witcher wiki and find this. But it's really interesting how Sapkowski develops that even further throughout the chapter. I found something really interesting also. Like I said, we didn't have as many fairy tale influences in this one, but there was some interesting stuff I found about Sylvans in Greek mythology that I'll just share with everyone.
Bring it.
So Sylvans can be connected to multiple mythologies and folklore, but they're more featured in Greek and Roman mythology, which they share a lot of mythology. The word Sylvan actually comes from the word Sylvanus in Roman mythology, who was a Roman tutelary deity of the woods and uncultivated lands. He is also described as a god of watching over the fields and husbandman, in particularly protecting the boundary of fields. So that's pretty interesting. We kind of see Torque doing that within the chapter. We see him with his big balls getting in. I like this. With his big balls, he's protecting the hemp and the crops and stuff like that. He literally wins a battle against Jaskier and Geralt. So
yeah. So good.
also, Sylvanus is described as the divinity of protecting the flock of cattle. I find that really interesting since we see a flock of elves, and warding off wolves, which is funny because Geralt comes from the school of the wolf. So I don't know.
Right.
I don't know if Sapkowski was pulling from that, but it could be. I'm probably just reading too much into it. In Greek mythology, also, Sylvans are connected to the Greek god of trees, Dionysus, the god of wine, vegetation, pleasure, and festivity. That's quite interesting because Sylvans are said to love music and dancing and have a direct connection to that in this story with the introduction of Dandelion. So we kind of have that dual comparison and a little bit of sprinkling of Sapkowski with that in this chapter. So I got a question for both of you and everyone in chat. Did you find that Torque was a kind of like this nice representation of growth and fertility, and that we shouldn't judge a book by its cover? Because like in the beginning we see Torque, we do all of these different things, and then by the end we kind of really grow to admire him.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good way to put it. Yeah, he does that, and he's just one other bit about the whole nature thing and why they don't like bloodshed that I appreciate as a theme is that, yeah, they're creatures of nature, and if you study nature, very little. There's not a lot of killing in nature that isn't for eating. There's definitely some. Animals will, defend their territory, especially like lions and hyenas. That's a good example. But it's mostly about killing to eat, and that's it. You eat, and then you move on. You don't kill otherwise. And that, I think, is an important thematic bit to include with creatures that live amongst nature and who defend nature and want to defend these ideals of nature, which is that killing is a part of life, but it should only be done when it's necessary. And Torque, as an herbivore, literally never has to kill. So from his perspective, it's like kind of an alien concept. So I appreciate that it's built into his character that he's not just randomly pacifist. It's like this fits with his lore, all the things behind him, all the setup for this being. It's so nice. I like that.
The peaceful resolution, the not wanting bloodshed, and him being an herbivore, but also in his set of beliefs, his belief system. That's what we do see this belief system challenged in this chapter, right? We see kind of all the different belief systems, and everybody's kind of having conflicts with that. He's really a great canvas for all of the different issues that we see within the short story.
Yeah, and again, stealth, on Sapkowski's part, because you wouldn't expect something like serious and weighty to come from this character, but it really does.
Well said.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of interesting stuff about Torque.
So a couple of the elves we should talk about. Obviously, the conversation between them is really important. You really do feel the suffering must be really intense for them. Teruviel's kind of breaks with her frustration is so intense that she kind of snaps a bit and starts crying. And she's we're not going to talk spoilers, but she does come later. She's a character that remains in the story, so that's kind of interesting. And the whole idea of how long they've been suffering too, because it's like another thing that reflects on human lifespans versus elf lifespans. Like a human being who spends their whole life suffering is obviously a terrible, tragic thing, but an elf could suffer for much longer because they have longer lives. And that's kind of one of the things that really comes up here is just, wow, they've not only are they suffering, but they've been suffering a long time, and they're slowly seeing so much of their society fall apart because the younger elves don't agree with the older elves on certain things, but the younger elves are the ones that can breed, and it's really quite, their society really is on the precipice. Like the edge of the world is a good metaphor for where they're at too.
And them experiencing so much trauma, them being at the edge of their limit for how much more they can take.
And they're being lied about, not lied about, but false. Like, I don't know that what's his face he wasn't deceiving Geralt and Dandelion when he said they live in silver towers. That's just what he's been told, and he hasn't challenged that idea. I don't think I don't think it's a malicious lie, but it's clearly false.
Well, not only is it false that it's clear that the elves do have some degree of material wealth that is useless to them, right? Like we have Philavandrel come in with what is it, emeralds or something on his headband, and it's well, you can't eat those, so their inns just state that the idea of normal wealth that we would perceive it, and that I think the people of the village would perceive it, is completely nullified.
That's where we see that the world, the differences in the lifestyle that everyone lives in the world, right? Like this perception of these elves being these living these grand lives, but they're not. It's just it's something that's just a fantasy.
Yeah, the whole idea that the elves are making these monsters too is that's just really sad. They're not making, well, I mean, it sort of is true, but not really. It's there's a grain of truth to that, but it's mostly not true.
Oh, a grain of truth. I see what you did there, Aziz.
So, and Philavandrel, as a leader of elves, he has this interesting sort of he has a responsibility towards his people, and it's a long-held responsibility, and it's, as we talked about, there's so much tragedy surrounding the whole thing. They're kind of on a tightrope. He has to, he's bound by the wishes of his people, but he also has to sort of keep them from getting ahead of themselves with their need to be violent and to take revenge on the humans, because, well, what good will that do if they just all come down from the mountains and get killed? What good is that, right? Although some of them are quite willing to do that rather than starve to death. So it's again, we're right back to what that theme we started with, where it's well, there is no answer here. What's the right move? How do you solve this? And
there's no best option.
Exactly. There isn't one. It's I don't know. That's why Geralt and Philavandrel have this debate, and neither of them really are super convincing, right? It's they both make good points, but not at no point are you oh yeah, that point right there, that he's totally right. That ends the argument. And no, it's just a philosophical debate with no end point. They could have gone on forever on that if he wanted to write 10 more pages.
So we got Philavandrel there. Do we want to move on to the other elves?
Sure. I mean, they're all, I consider them kind of an amalgam there. Galar we mentioned, but he's just kind of, there's not a lot of depth to him. There doesn't need to be. He's just a good example of someone who's just fed up his starvation and impatience and longing for what they once had. He's ready to kill. And honestly, if you were in his place, if I was in his place, I might be feeling the exact same way. I might not have that bit of forgiveness in me, or that patience. So would you be Philavandrel? Would you be Terubiel? Would you be Galar in this situation? Or would you be Torque? I would like to be Torque, but I don't know that I really would be if I was actually, in this situation.
Well, Aziz, one thing that the show did really well in a later episode was showing him these anti-elven attitudes when Ciri gets to the camp. And then we see someone wearing, literally, it's a necklace of elven ears. And we see that this person has, I don't want to say brainwashed, but has been taught certain things about history that, they don't know the whole other side of the story, and they are going out and killing all of these people. And you see how serious that is. And then, because we see what happens with Philavandrel in episode 2, and then we start to see some of that other stuff later, and then we're kind of see what Philavandrel was talking about, man.
Yeah, it really is a good, rewatching that scene or rereading the story. It just, you're right. It's a totally different feel. You're oh, I see. This isn't just, you get lots of examples rather than just the talk. Because at this point, you see them they're in bad shape, but it's mostly described over time. Yeah, you see it play out. You're right. It's so much more powerful when you've seen examples and recurring progress of this.
By the way, we got 2 more donations, Carrie Harrison and Gina, and I believe Rachel Walden, and a bunch of awesome AfterCon of Thrones and Con of Thrones. People are chilling in the chat. Apparently watching us in a theater room and having some drinks. So cheers to you guys.
Nice.
I'm drinking some coffee, but cheers to all of you and thanks for joining.
Right on. Yeah. Hey, thanks y'all guys. Thanks Gina and who else did you say? Kate and everybody. Right on.
Rachel Walden and Johnny
Rachel, hey y'all.
Simone Green and
hey Simone.
and Carrie and Jason, Corey and Brenda. So cool. Thanks guys.
Yeah. Are we ready for lore?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this one, Michal.
All right. The woman can only waggle her chin and mumble a text which she doesn't understand herself, and you stare at the girl with gaping mouths as if she were the statue of a goddess. You avoid her eyes, but try to guess her wishes, and her wishes are your command. Who is this Lilla of yours? But ye have guessed that, sir. A prophetess, a wise one, but say not of this to anyone.
Yeah, it's a neat little device that Lilla is the only person that can speak to this old woman who everyone says is deaf, yet she can't hear them when they're yelling, but she can whisper in her ear and they hear her. And then eventually, of course, we realize that's just an act. It's telepathy. So that's kind of neat. So what I really wonder is the history of this character or this being, and they just don't know, like there's a lot of mystery around this. And how did she factor in, like when the elves were pushed away by the humans, when the human settlers came in, like what was she doing? Like, did she play a role? Did she just watch? I'm fascinated by what that must have been. The elves may have been really even sadder when she just watched this happen and they maybe expected her to do something. I don't know, maybe that was exactly what they expected, that she wouldn't do anything. So it's very sad and mysterious and haunting. What do you guys think of Lilla?
Interesting character. Kind of like a hidden Bran Stark.
Yeah, hidden and silent. Yeah.
Is she really a character? That's the thing. Like she's very interesting, but she is kind of more like an avatar of fertility / growth / nature.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
She's definitely not a person. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But she's not an elf either. So it's I don't know. It's an interesting situation. She's kind of there are a couple of usually female characters or whatever who like show up in that kind of like limbic space. There's one at the end of Sword of Destiny who does the same thing. But yeah, they don't show up often, but they're interesting when they do.
Magic?
Yeah, he seems, Geralt has this concept that he seems to be aware of this concept of these women like Lilla, and whether she is an outstanding example of this or more in line with what he's seen before is not clear. But let's read the quote first, and then we'll talk about how this touches on real society with the notion of powerful or wise women.
Mm-hmm. The strange women and girls called prophetesses or wise ones who could be found in villages didn't enjoy the favor of those noblemen who collected levies and profited from farming. Farmers always consulted prophetesses on everything and believed them blindly and boundlessly. Decisions based on their advice were often completely contrary to the politics of lords and overlords. Geralt had heard of incomprehensible decrees, the slaughter of entire pedigree herds, the cessation of sowing or harvesting, and even the migration of entire villages. Local lords therefore opposed the superstition, often brutally, and freemen very quickly learned to hide the wise ones. But they didn't stop listening to their advice, because experience proved the wise ones were always right in the long run.
Which is super sad when you think about it, because that means she's right about, the elves would know that she's right to send them off, because for whatever, they don't necessarily know the reason, but whatever humans have learned about wise ones always being right, elves would have learned that too, and probably learned it far longer ago, and have been living with this knowledge for far longer. So that's probably why they're so even more openly devout towards her and faithful, and because they've known for a long time and they've revered this for a long time. But she's in the book too, right? There's like this notion of this.
Yeah.
And are elves in the book? That's another one. I wonder, like, what does it say about them? And is that why they have this superstition about the elves being evil and making monsters? Does the book tell them that? I guess so, but I wouldn't. We can't confirm that.
So Macrophage in the chat says that Lilla is taken from Slavic mythology, and it's what they read about her is very accurate. So that's another thing that we don't know about.
I wonder if Lilla is shorter for Lilith, which is kind of something. That
I mean that definitely. Yeah. We had a reference to Lilith in
devil thing in Christianity.
Yeah. And we had a reference to Lilith in the Lesser Evil, sort of, right? I think.
Yeah. Lilith, but same difference. Yeah. That's the version here. Yeah. Lilith, yeah.
So I don't know if there's any connection to that, but pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's a good call. I mean, I think there's probably, I imagine that's where he's coming from, because it's the same sort of like powerful feminine being that's wisdom, like eternal and wise, and well, the wise part isn't always included, but it's certainly the powerful and feminine. Certainly, the wise part applies here for sure, though. But I don't know that it always is.
I don't think she is Lilith, but in the same sense, she is in that mythology-based goddess kind of spectrum. Is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
One weird creature that gets mentioned a few times that I just had to check out is the Myriapodon, which is just another example of, like, you could break that down by its roots, Greek roots. There you've got. Myria, which means many, and pod, which means foot. So many feet, and it's a giant centipede. So
no, thank you. No, thank you. I decline. I'm not interested.
No,
did you guys see that picture actually that was going around the internet a while ago? Like, not a while ago, probably beginning of the month, where they found basically something like that, or they speculated and built a huge model of like a massive centipede.
That's exactly what we
don't want. Giant centipede on this planet.
So it was like, I just kind of skimmed it and I was like, well, it's 2020, so like, is this going to end with, and now it's back?
Next thing you know, we're going to have giant centipedes the size of kaiju.
Oh, God.
That's what we don't want. We've already had enough in 2020.
Do not want. Reject.
So here's another note from Ludmilla about devils. This is something that we didn't learn on our own, but is very valuable here, and you can pretty easily see how it applies. She wrote in our Facebook group, there is interesting hierarchy among the devils. Apparently there's folk devils, noble devils, and foreign devils, mainly. These are mainly German distinctions, apparently. In the edge of the world, we have the first kind, folks or peasant devils at the bottom of the hierarchy. He's the dumbest and easily fooled, which, if you can be fooled by nuts as iron balls, you could see how that would be. Soap is cheese. Yeah, like if you're easy, that does sound like someone easy to fool. She also writes, another interesting fact, devils are heavy, and it's easiest to spot one when they get on the cart. So when Netley asked Geralt and Jaskier to get on the cart, her suggestion is that it might be like a reference to the way they would test people to see if they were devils back in olden times, to see if, their weight references, if they're hiding their weight, basically. And she also says folk devils like to eat honey and nuts, especially, and that they have musical talent. So that does fit extremely well. So these influences are pretty clearly in play here for Sapkowski, unless we're dealing with some really amazing coincidences.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Devil.
So we also have a few more notes. Yeah, well, we talked about the dwarven and the.
Yeah, I just thought that was interesting. That like, they're very convinced both the devils don't exist and also that they are a very important part of kind of like the lexicon of this world. Like all the different kind of groups of people have, devil scheiss and a devil up ein, whatever which probably means a devil up your ass, and a lot of different things that are low. I think lower key lore or lower brow lore anyway. But I enjoyed.
So we have some more Elvish related themes here that we've got a couple of quotes for. One, we're going to talk about the Age of Men and how that's changing the world, and how that would how that's a theme and throughout the story. And then we have a little bit of talk on racism. So let's have this first Age of Men quote.
Yeah. This is from Philivandrel.
Yeah.
Yes, we are starving. Yes, we are threatened with annihilation. The sun shines differently. The air is different. Water is not as it used to be. The things we used to eat, made use of, are dying, diminishing, deteriorating. We never cultivated the land. Unlike you humans, it pays a bloody tribute. It bestowed gifts on us. You tear the earth's treasures from it by force. For us, the earth gave birth and blossomed because it loved us. Well, no love lasts forever, but we still want to survive.
Ooh. That's strong, huh? That touches on what we were talking about before about the difference in how humans and elves deal with nature, and how they elves revere it, where humans it's used to serve them. And I don't know that, I mean, it's not like either side is wrong. It's just very, very different at how you view it. It's like, I like comedy, you like tragedy. Neither person is wrong necessarily, but they're very different. So I don't have a whole lot to say about this other than to be in awe of the truth of that and how powerful it is. But and of course, it's such an important theme going forward too. This is not the end of this.
Yeah, and I mean, just the idea of like, you were in one kind of story, and then the story rejected you. That's a really like that's such a sad idea. Like that, no love lasts forever. That we were the chosen children of the earth, and then the earth moved on. Lilla moved on to someone else, and it's.
That goes along.
Yeah, I don't know. It's intense, man. I don't really know what to make of it. It's like
that goes along with the theme of annihilation and history being rewritten, and them disappearing, and all of that. Which is that's like really sad, really sad.
And they don't even. Yeah, it's super sad. They don't even know. They look down on the humans for something that is helping them, right? Like I guess that's a weird way to put it. What I mean is that. It's like ignorance is bliss. The humans have shorter lifespans, so they're never going to see this happen. And if they do, they won't see it. They won't see the long, slow death of their people and the rejection by, it'll be, their lifespans are too short. They won't see this rise and fall. Whereas the elves have to see this all in excruciating, slow detail and just suffering through the years and so that would be like the kind of thing they would like, look, we live longer, we have more perspective, yet they get all these rewards. They're the ones living happily, yet it doesn't seem fair, right? Like
yeah, I mean, I think that idea of the elves, like the very thing that makes the elves better, right? Like is their longevity, their connection to the earth is exactly the cause of their suffering now, and that's a kind of suffering that humans couldn't experience. That's pretty potent.
Yeah. So talk about racism. That's obviously a strong theme with elves and humans having very strong reactions to each other. There's obviously exceptions, as you mentioned, Michal. There's Cheridian in the next story, and he's lives amongst humans. There's lots of elves that do that. There's half elves, quarter elves, etc. Different human nations have different sort of general attitudes towards elves. The Nilfgaardians are closer to the elves in a lot of ways, in part because their culture is closer to the elves. Their language has more elvish in it, things like that. On the other hand, there's places that are extremely anti-elven that, like Kyle, you mentioned, the show had perhaps one of the most stark examples of this with that kid with elf ears. And that sort of thing might not happen if humans had longer lives, right? If this kid had a bigger picture of the history between elves and humans, he might be like, wow, both sides have been really bad to each other. And this is not just clearly the humans are right, but some people would just do that because I'm a human, I'm going to take the human side. But we as readers aren't thrust into the center of it, forced to take sides. We get to look back and say, wow, this is really reflective of things that can apply to the real world.
It's crazy because it really highlights what happens in a human lifespan and an elven lifespan, right? Like humans are born and then they're taught certain things, and then they're either like the social hierarchy, but like the elven structure of the way things work is so different because they can live for hundreds of years. Humans have this more kind of transactional relationship with life because it's shorter. You know what I mean? As opposed to elves, which is like more enriched by the world and nature and their connection to things.
Other than like human sorcerers, there's no such thing as a human that has held a belief for several hundred years, right? Because they don't live that long. But there's elves that have believed the same thing for hundreds of years, and that's a different sort of stubbornness that can come from holding a belief for a span of time that's impossible for a human without magic.
Yeah, and I think this is really the racism and the interactions between humans and elves and the marginalization of elves and other magical species is really where Sapkowski starts. Like, some of the metaphors starts to fall away.
Yeah, it's not metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, like, he definitely goes into the idea that, like, sure, like, they could assimilate, but it's not going to be nice. Like, so this quote is from, again, Filavandrel. Cohabit on your terms, acknowledging your sovereignty, losing our identity. Cohabit as what? Slaves, pariahs? Cohabit with you from beyond the walls you've built to fence your sorry. Cohabit with you from beyond the walls you've built to fence yourselves away in towns. Cohabit with your women and hang for it, or look on what half-blood children must live with. Why are you avoiding my eyes, strange human? How do you find cohabiting with neighbors from whom, after all, you do differ somewhat? And yeah, that idea that, the differences between humans and elves, like, are going to extend even, like, the prejudice is going to endure even when they're pretending that there isn't prejudice there. Like, I think there's just, I don't really want to draw any too direct parallels because I don't want to be, like, disrespectful of real life occurrences, but I think all of what he's referencing here we can definitely see in the idea in real world marginalization of people by other humans. So yeah, I found that really intense and something that is very important to keep in mind going forward even in the this is going to come into play in the lesser evil, the grain of truth. The grain of truth?
Which one?
Oh no, the arching story, the connecting story.
Voice of Reason.
Voice of Reason. There you go. Too many thes in this.
We can do those episodes over again, but it'll be 2 hours each.
Yeah, but that's just a really important theme to keep in mind going forward, because it's definitely something that Sapkowski has a lot to say about.
Yeah, Geralt's take on it is really interesting. He's like, he kind of acknowledges that Filavandrel has a point, but he's also like, well, but still, there's this bottom line. There's, what choice do you have? And, well, there are more choices perhaps than Geralt thinks, or Geralt chooses to accept, but it's debatable, whether Filavandrel's attitude is the best for his people or it's the best, because what does that mean? What is best for elves? I mean, this is unfathomable to us, because not just because they're fictional, but because it's something that is born from living as a person that has this perspective. It's not something that you can really get by hearing it. It's something that I suppose you have to experience or feel. You can only intellectually say, wow, this must be really powerful. This must be really strong. But
that's why Geralt's perspective is so interesting, because he's neutral. You know, like
Yeah.
But yet he has experienced some of the same things as Filavandrel, and he was also a human before he became a Witcher. So it's like there's this. Geralt is. That's why he's so great at being in the middle of these situations. He can kind of offer this great perspective because he has experienced so many different things, so many different places.
He does have some outcast experience, like a significant amount of that, and the long life thing. He's another exception to the rule of human lifespans, although he's not like super old at this point. He's
somewhat sympathetic to what he's feeling.
Yeah.
But he's definitely older than a human would be at this point normally. Like he's what is he probably like in his 80s or something around here? I'm not sure, but definitely more lived experience than say Dandelion. who's always telling him, listen here, this is important, you should pay attention.
Shots fired, man.
So let's have that quote from Geralt, and then we can move on to our last little subsection before our funny moments section, which is the last part.
Oh, hell yeah.
He says, I manage because I have to, because I've no other way out, because I've overcome the vanity and pride of being different. I've understood that they are a pitiful defense against being different, because I've understood that the sun shines differently when something changes, but I'm not the axis of those changes. The sun shines differently, but it will continue to shine, and jumping at it with a hoe isn't going to do anything. We've got to accept facts, Elf. That's what we've got to learn. Yeah, it comes back around to that narrative, right? Like which story are you telling yourself? Like which is it vanity? Is it, is it true what Geralt's saying? Is it I don't know.
What's the value of pride? Like it's not, some people would say it's worthless, but some people would say it has some value, and some people would fall in between. So it's not up to Geralt to tell elves what that means, but he can tell them what it costs them to not give it up. So
right, which is so interesting because he really is that kind of like that point in the middle and kind of fitting in neither community of humans or non-humans.
Yeah.
Which is why Yennefer is his perfect equal. Okay, we'll get to that next.
Oh my God! Yeah, Yormi in chat. Yorman Gander Loki-san says, Jaskier Dandelion is the donkey to Geralt's Shrek, or the Merlin to Geralt's King Arthur.
He also says you're like the geeky son of Ragnar Lothbrok.
Are we talking the show version of Vikings? Because
you'll take that.
I'm damn handsome if that's the case.
Yeah, if someone compares you to Travis Fimmel, you take the compliment.
He was literally a male supermodel, so I'll take it.
Yeah, it's totally off topic, but that's the great best joke about that show is like the two main characters in that show. Both of them were models, and one of them was a martial artist. Which one was it? But it's not Travis Fimmel, the martial artist. Catherine Winnick owned her own martial arts gym by the time she was 21.
She's almost 40, by the way, and she's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, she still looks like she's 21. But anyway, yeah.
Anyways, sorry, Michal. Oh, we were going off about Catherine Winnick there.
She's our own version of Lilla. With talking, she's like, wow, how is that a person? She's too amazing. So let's talk about herbs, plants, and stuff. There's mostly just crops in this one, which maybe there was more to that than I would think, but I didn't delve too deep into corn and wheat. But there was this. Here's a little quote, if you please.
Look at those purple flowers. They're lupins. They's be vetch to be true, interrupted Netley. Have you nae seen lupins or what?
So vetch is a common old legume. It's been domesticated. It's like one of the first things ever domesticated as far as plants. It was probably like since BC 9500 or something crazy like that. But we still use it all over the world. Something like 900,000 tons of it was grown worldwide in 2017. But lupin's actually the joke here. The fact that it's not a lupin is sort of a tongue-in-cheek joke, because lupin, it comes from the word lupus, which means wolf. So it's a joke about wolves, but also lupins symbolize imagination. and new opportunities, which clearly is, you can see how that applies to this theme, to this story here. New opportunities, imagination. Dandelion's very imaginative. He's thinking of how to tell the story afterwards and embellish it a little bit. But like 2 sentences later, after that quote, when Netley is done correcting Dandelion, because his correction takes a little longer, the bard says, "The Valley of Flowers, Dal Blafana," and then he says,
"You paying attention? The elves have gone, but their name remains. Lack of imagination."
Yeah, so I think that having a little joke there with the Lupin theme. So
that's funny.
Yeah, sneaky Sepkowski. Yep, very good.
This is so annoying, guys. We were like, this is going to be a short episode because
it's funny because I'm like, analysis will be different for this one. We'll be like, 90 minutes max. Yeah, we're at like 2 fucking hours. Sorry.
So Buttercups. Now, we talked about dandelions before, but Buttercup is probably the better thing to look into as far as Jaskier's character, because the translation of Jaskier is Buttercup, and then they just decided to change that to Dandelion since it sounds more masculine, even though it's not really that much more masculine. But it's but Sapkowski's intent was the word Buttercup. So the word Buttercup, the scientific name, the original name is Ranunculus, which translates to little frog, and just so happens that that Dandelion is dressed in all green here in this story, so that's probably intentional. The translation of Buttercup into Dutch is Renonkel. In Italian, it's Renoncolo. And so there's all sorts of translations that are different. Like, this is funny because Dandelion's an existing word, so it's not a name. In other words, I mean, it is a name, but the translations are funny. Like, you translate Geralt of Rivia into any other language, it's still pretty much Geralt. Occasionally, it's like Geralto or Geraltus, but it's pretty much the same. But this word comes out so very differently because you're dealing with an existing word. Like, they're not, the dandelion, there's already a word for dandelion or buttercup in all these languages. So it presents with some weird challenges. Like in Czech, dandelion is marigold, and Tris marigold is Tris ranuncle, which like ranunculus. So it all gets twisted around a bit. And then just for fun, the translation of buttercup into German is Rittersporn. And in Swedish, it's Ritterspor, which I just think German is great. It has so many great words that are
very similar to spurge. Just like a weird, creepy Ritter plant.
Horn. So as far as what they symbolize and their nature, buttercups come in a variety of colors, like a very large variety of colors, which that is absolutely true of Jaskier. He comes in a variety of colors. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean, he dresses in a wide variety of big colors. Purple, perhaps more often than anything else, but other things. And they symbolize positive things like charm and positivity and staying upbeat and facing challenges. So that's pretty, you can see how that applies to him. Now, obviously, symbolism for flowers tends to be pretty vague, but still that applies pretty well.
Fertility and growth.
Yeah, which obviously fits really well with this story. So this last little bit is a perfect lead-in to our funniest moments, because these are 2 original legends about buttercups, about ranunculi. The first one is a Persian legend about a Persian prince who dresses in green and gold. So I'm going to keep a lookout in the future for Jaskier dressed in green and gold. He's certainly dressed in green in this one. And he sings to this nymph. So right there we have singing, and the nymph loves him and he loves her back. But the other nymphs just don't like this relationship. So they turn him into a flower. And of course, it's a buttercup. An alternate version is that he died of a broken heart because the nymph rejected him, and a buttercup grew on the spot he died. So then there's a second story, and this is a Native American story, and it's pretty weird. There's a coyote who, just for fun, he's tossing his eyes into the air. Yeah, his eyeballs. He's throwing them into the air for fun. So what? An eagle flies by and is like, free eyes, and eats them because they're in the air. Because, if you're a bird and there's eyes flying around, you eat them. And so this coyote is like, well, that stinks. So now I need new eyes. So what does he do? He replaces his eyes with buttercups. That's the story. What? So I asked them offline. I was like, is that less or more weird than the flying fish story from the Cinderella legends. So you all can decide for yourselves which of those is stranger, but they're both cool and interesting, and there's probably some deep symbolism and cultural significance that is way over our heads there.
But yeah, that leads us into funniest moments, and usually we have a pretty short section. I don't think it'll be too long, but we have more quotes than usual. We have quotes from a few people from our Facebook group. Of course, this is a chance to tell you to join our Facebook group, come hang out, and we have all sorts of chats. We do threads on there and stuff like that. So you can find the link to that in the description of the video. But yeah, let's start with some funniest moments. There's quite a few here.
Yeah, no shortage in this episode.
Who put this first one? I love this one.
I just wanted to start off with the line when Geralt is talking to the alderman at the beginning. The alderman quite visibly started to think again.
What about this one? The etching showed a disheveled monstrosity with enormous eyes and even larger teeth, riding a horse. In its right hand, the monstrous being wielded a substantial sword. In its left, a bag of money.
A witchman, mumbled the woman. Called by some a witcher. To summon him is most dangerous, albeit one must, for when against the monster and the vermin there be no aid, the witchman can contrive, but one must be careful to...
Enough, muttered Geralt. Enough, Grandma. Thank you.
No, protested Dandelion with a malicious smile. How does it go on? What a greatly interesting book. Go on, Granny, go on. But one must be careful not to touch the witchman, for thus the mange can one acquire, and lasses do from him hide away, for lustful the witchman is above all measure. Quite correct. Spot on, laughed the poet, and Lilla, so it seemed to Geralt, smiled almost imperceptibly. Though the witchman greatly covetous and greedy for gold be, muttered and mumbled the old woman, half closing her eyes, giveth ye not such a one more than for a downer 1 silver penny, or 3 halves for a werecat silver pennies 2, for a plumbered silver pennies.
Those were the days, muttered the Witcher.
Oh. There's so many great quotes. Like we could do a whole episode on comedy.
Yes, we could. This one would be like the lead. This is the story of all. I mean, there's always funny quotes. That's why we have a section every time. But this one really is a cut above. So I think a lot of people cited this one. Let's see. Mick, who wants to read each part here? I can read the bold part.
I'll do the underline, or do you want me to do the first part, Michal?
I can be Grandma.
Okay.
Having broken his teeth, he will be attentive as thou eatest the honey. Of said honey will he himself desire. Givest him of birch tar, then yourself eateth soft cheese. Soon hearest thou will the devil grumbleth and tumbleth, but makest of it as naught. Yet if the devil desireth soft cheese, give him soap, for soap the devil withstandeth not.
You got to the soap? Interrupted Geralt with a stony expression, turning towards Dune and Netley.
In no way, groaned Netley. If only we had got to the balls. But he gave us what for when he bit a ball.
And who told you to give him so many? Dandelion was enraged. It stands written in the book, 1 fistful to take, yet ye gaveth of balls a sackful. Ye furnished him with ammunition for 2 years, the fool you be.
Our friend Lady Gwen, shout out to Radio Westeros podcast, said, "Yet ye gaveth of balls a sackful," is one of the best comic lines from an ever comedic character.
She would be a great guest to have on the Witcher podcast.
That's true.
That would be awesome.
She is a fan of literature and of many styles of literature. She'd have some good takes, I'm sure.
Once we start getting into Arthurian stuff, especially, she's an expert in that.
Perfect call. You're right.
We will explore that once we learn how to keep our episodes less than 2 hours between the three of us. Oh.
Okay, listen. Radio Westeros can't really talk to us in terms of they can't stick their nose in the air as far as episode length.
We'll just do a super episode that's like 4 hours long or something.
Yeah, their stuff's amazing.
So I love here's another great line that I cited here, one of my favorites, which is when Geralt and Dandelion are discussing the plans. I'll do the underline here. What do you want to do?
Rummage around a bit in the hemp.
That's original, snorted the troubadour, though not too refined.
And you, how would you go about it?
Intelligently.
Bill, bleated the goat horn in agreement or denial or simply bleeding for the sake of it.
It's like he's agreeing, he's denying, or
you should listen to that in the audiobook. It's absolutely hilarious. Jason.
Yeah.
Is it not Jason Kenny, Peter Kenny. Right.
Peter Kenny, yeah.
Ryan Burns has one from our Facebook group, Aziz.
Yeah, he quotes, he pulled the line, "The next few minutes passed in an intense skirmish, an exchange of insults and kicks. If Geralt was pleased about anything, it was only that nobody could see him, for it was a truly ridiculous sight."
Lilla had another one saying,
"Yeah."
Yaskir suddenly looked around. "Someone's following us," he said, excited. "In a cart!"
You take the whole thing, Kyle. Go for it. I believe in you.
"Incredible," scoffed the Witcher without looking around. "In a cart? And I thought that the locals rode on bats." "Do you know what?" growled the troubadour. "The closer we get to the edge of the world, the sharper your wit. I dread to think what it will come to."
Yeah. So we can make that sort of a regular thing, y'all. If you pull your favorite, funniest quotes, they don't have to be your funniest, but those are easier for us to quickly do. But in the Facebook group, if you guys join or tweet at us your favorite quote from each story or chapter, and we'll shout out some of the best ones.
Think of it as our like mailbag section, kind of.
Yeah. I see some great comments here. Kate Bertinsky in the chat says, "Did I just hear of balls a sack full?"
Unfortunate if they're blue balls. Lol.
Yep. All right.
So yeah, that's did we have anything else?
No, I have some thanks and acknowledgements, but personally, that was all the quotes I had.
Yeah, so let's get to thanking some people, Aziz.
Yeah, well, thanks to the Witcher Wiki, we certainly get some information from there. In particular, I got the information on the translations, the various forms of dandelion / buttercup. That was really helpful. And then I did my research on the symbolism of flowers. I got from a variety of places, but the site that I most want to shout out is petalrepublic.com, obviously PETAL. That's proven a very good site over several instances of researching flower symbolism, which just keeps coming up. Herb lore and flowers, like every episode we've had at least a little something. Some episodes more than others, but there's always been a little something, and so that's going to most likely continue until it doesn't, until there isn't something to say.
So that's going to do it for today, but next time, we're super excited to announce that we're going to be doing more episodes like this, of course. Next time, we're going to be covering The Last Wish. That one is going to be a really, really interesting one to cover, because that is the biggest short story in chapter by a significant margin.
Yeah.
So
and Yennefer.
And Yennefer. So, like I said, we really want to appreciate everyone that came here today. There was lots of great excitement in the chat, lots of great comments. Like I said, we want to invite everyone to come check out our Facebook group, the Podcast is Surprise on Facebook. You can come join. We have a fun little community. We're growing. I think we have 70 people or so now. So we really appreciate everyone that's posting away on there. Of course, a big reason why this episode happened was because of the awesome members that support our podcast and this channel. So we want to thank everyone for that. Aziz, do you have a list of names of the people that hit that join the support button on Anchor?
Absolutely. Thanks to Maura, Ryan B, Sam D, James G, and we have one anonymous supporter as well. So thanks to all 5 of y'all. And it seems like we may have had someone join the channel today as well.
Yeah, someone joined the channel. I believe it was Aegon the Sixth. So that is one cool thing. You can hit the join button, and we had some awesome donations today too. Gina Morley had 2 or 3 in there. She always does. And a couple of people, the Nashville After Crown of Thrones people, we want to appreciate that. So yeah, thanks for people who are joining the podcast and the channel, and also supporting us on Anchor. You can, by the way, everyone, find all the awesome links to our Anchor, who are our sponsors. Really, really awesome. You can find all the Spotify links and the playlists and all of that. Spotify, iTunes, all of the different platforms that you can listen to podcasts on. And also, you can find the links to Aziz's social media and content, and also Michal's as well. So you can find that in the link in the description of the video. Michal, what's next for you?
So I am working away. Right now, actually, my main other podcast is the Level 7 Access podcast, where I'm breaking down the last season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in excruciating detail with my very good friends. And definitely check that out if you like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., because we really get into it over there.
And it's ending. It's the last season. So.
It is, yeah, but it's good this year, so.
Hell yeah.
At least going out on a high note.
You can, so like I said, you can find all of Michal's links in the description of this video. Aziz.
Well, what I've got coming up is a lot of what you would expect. We're still continuing with Valar Rereadus over on History of Westeros channel. We are entering the final third of A Feast for Crows. Lots of cool stuff there. We're working on a Defiance of Duskendale episode. We've got Blackwood history coming. We've got Lies in Arbor Gold live stream on Wednesday.
Chloe!
Yeah, with Chloe, aka Drunk, A Song of Ice and Fire history from Girls Gone Canon. And that's going to be awesome. And I'm doing game stream still. It's my usual Friday Crusader Kings for A Song of Ice and Fire stream is always at 6 Eastern. I'll be doing that in about 2 hours. So come check that out if you are interested. Otherwise, see you on the next Pod of Surprise.
Yeah, and for me, channel soft reboot / relaunch next week. I just launched the schedule. You can check out the schedule in the community tab. I put a post up there, or if you follow me on the Fandom Media Facebook groups, you can check that out. And I am also doing a game stream tonight. There's a new game that released on PS4 called Ghosts of Tsushima, which is set in Japan, where the Mongols are taking over Japan. It got 10 out of 10 ratings, and it's said to be the best samurai game ever created, very much like Assassin's Creed. So I'm going to be playing some samurai games tonight, tomorrow, and Sunday. And yeah, shall we finish it off with a quote today, Michal?
Yeah, let's do it. I'll describe our whole exhibition. We'll start that again.
That's a great way to finish it.
I'll describe our whole expedition to the edge of the world in a ballad, declared Dandelion. And I'll describe you in it too, Talk.
So thank you for watching, everyone.
Wait, Kyle. You have to read it.
Oh, I have to read it.
Yeah, I told you, I'm not reading it.
Your Torque, yeah.
Can we just start that again?
Yeah, let's just do that again.
No.
All right.
Okay.
We've had false starts before. This is our first false
Go
finish.
ahead,
ending.
Kyle. I totally forgot this was my part, lol. Professional, Kyle.
I'll describe our whole expedition to the edge of the world in a ballad, declared Dandelion. And I'll describe you in it too, Talk.
Don't think you'll get away with it, growled the Sylvan. I'll write a ballad too then and describe you, but in such a bad way as you won't be able to show your face in decent company for 12 years. So watch out. So watch out for the next podcast of Surprise. We'll be back soon. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Have a great weekend. Stay safe.